So thank you for joining me for this talk at the start of our afternoon CX Summit. I put the title as this. It was things driving the next wave of customer engagement, and then I changed it a bit to say automation to agency, which I think is the trend I really want to talk about, as I think it's the most interesting thing. If you're not familiar with me, I was on a panel earlier, but I am Cavell's CX analyst, so I handle all of our CCAS and CX-focused research, which is why I'm speaking to you here today. So let's just dive straight in. Let's talk about the last 5 years, and let's talk about what's happened in the last 5 years. Obviously, the big question about getting people onto the cloud, getting people moving towards cloud migration, in some ways, mostly solved now. There is still a lot of on-prem. That's not really the question, but the question of is cloud safe? Should we be using it? Is it better? Has kind of been solved in a lot of cases. And I mean, if you want to look for evidence of that, look at the on-prem providers and see what's happening with their revenue and their press release, things like that. And you can see what's happening there. But we're on a pretty solid trajectory toward cloud migration. We've seen a lot of deployment of targeted siloed point solutions, so chatbots to solve specific problems, that kind of thing. But they're working, they're not working. They've gotten obsolete very quickly. So it's quite interesting to think that we spent a lot of time the last 5 years fixing specific problems. And now we're looking at the targeted solutions that we deployed, and we're asking, are those now the thing that's holding us back? And then also a lot of the last 5 years has just been spent dealing with the amount of call volume we've had to deal with. How many calls are actually coming in? How are we deflecting them? How are we managing them? How are we getting rid of or dealing with just the number of calls that are coming in? I think that's a really big challenge that we've had, whereas I think now we're starting to think, okay, we're still getting all of this call volume, but there are better ways of dealing with it as we move into the next 5 years. So let's look at some data. Let's look at what's happening first with channels. So we've got the key channels in the contact center. You go out and ask contact center decision makers what they're still using. Unsurprisingly, email and phone still at the top of the agenda. And if you go and talk to agents, and we're doing a presentation about our agent research later on, agents still prefer to use email and phone day to day because they know if they get their customer onto the email or onto the phone, they can solve their problem. Whereas the automated system might not be doing it the way that they want it to. Then we've got obviously things like social media messaging and live chat, SMS, all those sorts of things growing as well. But those traditional channels are still where a lot of the contact center happens. So even if we think about what needs to change to grow more towards automation and more of those sorts of things, we need to both maintain the value and the quality of those traditional channels, but then also build automated systems that move people away from them and allow those automated channels to do what they're very good at, which is solving customer issues, in an intelligent and engaged way. And that is what contact center managers think will happen. We surveyed this big group of 500 US contact center managers, and over half of them said, look, our customers are going to be happy if we bring in a fully or mostly automated solution. About 80% said that their customers will be happy with a decent level of automation, and then about 30% said we can build fully automation and our customers are going to be happy with it. So the momentum of people building contact centers is very much we can build automation, we can get it working, and we can get it go better. I just need to... The clock hasn't started down here, so I need to know how long I'm speaking for. Or the panelists will be looking at me, why are you still going on? So let's move on then. So what is happening with call volume and task complexity? And why is automation such a big talking point? So when we went and we surveyed agents and we said, okay, some of your businesses have now deployed AI, and they're trialing things like transcription, automated quality management. They're trialing these systems that are supposed to make you more efficient. Okay, what's actually happening with your job then? Are you having to handle less tasks? Are your tasks getting more simple, more complex? And guess what? 46% of them said, actually, the amount of work that I have to do, the amount of tasks that I have to handle has gone up by about 46%, and the complexity of those tasks has gone up 46%. So agent jobs aren't necessarily getting easier, even as we're deploying AI. In fact, they're getting, they're having to handle more throughput, and they're having to handle more task complexity. So in the face of that, the reason that automation and this discussion about moving automation into agency is so relevant is this idea that we're not actually reducing task volume all that much. And in fact, if you think about the trends that are pushing discussions at the moment, and you think about the impact of consumer-focused systems, stuff like ChatGPT on customer experience, you can turn and very, very easily see that if you give everyone in the room a system that enables, reassures, and clarifies their rights and position on customer experience, drafts emails for them, gives them a script to read out to the CX agent they're talking to, suddenly we go from, people who will be fobbed off with, we can't do that, here's a lower offer, into a system where every single customer starts to argue with you with a script that they've been given. And you can see that complexity ramping up considerably as we move into a world where more people are enabled with these tools. So we need automation, we need it to be better to handle those. But let's look at what's actually happening with automation and customer experience. And this journey from rigid automation through to agentic and the future and what that looks like. So the past 5 years, what we've done, we've built a lot of chatbots with a lot of very strict rules. We've automated some basic repetitive tasks, and we've really used manual control on humans to define logic at every stage of the journey and really have tight control over exactly what's happened. Customers responded and said, look, the system doesn't really understand what I'm trying to achieve. It can automate some things, but ultimately I'm going to sit there and I'm going to spam 0 to try and speak to an agent and get that resolved as quickly as possible. Where we are now in some companies and where we're moving to quite quickly, I would say, is very, very good at single task resolution. You want to change your address, you want to rebook a flight, you want to, do all these kind of very, very simple things. There's going to be a bot, there's going to be an automated system that can do that for you, and it's going to be very good at doing that. We're actually quite good at building workflows. So we're quite good at taking what you're doing with one agent, and if you have another problem at the end of you doing it with that agent, we'll move you on to another agent that can solve the next problem and chain these things together. But obviously that takes a lot of time. But we can automate these workflows for people and get them through an automated journey that will resolve all of their problems. But it doesn't feel natural. It feels slow. The system understands what the customer wants, but it's not really giving them a good customer service. It doesn't feel like a natural interaction. So where are we going in the future? And I'll try and shed some light on where the future is. So if at the moment companies are trying to get to task with this present box, they're trying to think, how do I deploy agents that can handle single tasks very well, whether that's an appointment booking or that kind of thing. Where we're moving to is more of an automation of an actual customer journey. So I come to you, I speak to you about a multi-layered problem. I'm in a hotel, I don't just want to check out late or change the date that I've booked in. I want to do all of those things and order room service and laundry at the same time. To do that, we need to be able to spin up multiple agents. We need to be able to bring those agents in and out of the conversation, have each of those agents take the piece of the intent that's relevant for them, handle it, solve it, and keep the person in one free-flowing conversation. And then if anything goes wrong in that conversation, guess what? We also need to take a transcript of that, hand it to a real person, and get that person up to speed on the conversation really quickly. And that's where we're going. A key part of that, and a key part of this idea, agentic, that gets thrown around a lot in the CX space at the moment, because it's what all of the vendors are developing, is that there is a piece of automation that mimics human logic and reasoning, which then says, I know how to solve your problem, even if I haven't necessarily been programmed with the exact solution to your specific problem. And therefore, I can go and I can either identify a place where I need a human to come into the loop and give me a judgment, or I can identify another agent that has the answer that I need, go activate that agent, get the data from it, and then come back and solve the customer issue. And if you look at all the demos of this, what you end up with is conversations that feel natural. I pick up the phone to a voice agent. I say, hey, here is my 5 problems. It says, cool, let's fix those. And it just starts presenting me solutions, which I can say, yeah, I'm cool with that. No, I don't like that. Until we get to a very fast resolution where I, as the customer, feel like I've just spoken my problems aloud, and the resolution of that has come full circle to them being solved. So that's where we're going. We're quite far away from that right now, if I'm being honest, and I think a lot of people in the room will agree that we're still quite far away from that. There's a lot of stumbling blocks. The technology is getting there, probably faster than the processes that we have for managing our customers and the skills and the data management at our customers have to get us there. So there's lots of things that need to happen before we can move to that idea of an agentic future. But the technology is going to get there first. And then the rest of us are going to be figuring out how to get our customers there. And I think that's a really big thing that we have to grasp with. So let's just talk about the problems of the next 5 years to tee up this panel that we're going to do with Five9 NICE and Zoom in a second. So the first thing to talk about is obviously from the problem of cloud migration to the idea of CX design. from siloed data to orchestrated intelligence, and then from this idea of fighting to automate at all to fighting for moments of human contact. And let's dig into that a little bit more. So we're starting off now, we're in a position where it's like, let's get you to the cloud. Let's migrate you from a different cloud where you're having problems. Let's take the contact center that you've built and build it again with this huge RFP that you've written that tells me all the processes you need that are going to deliver the same contact center experience that you've had. As the technology advances and we can change the way that we deal with customer service, guess what? That's not the best way to do this anymore. The best way is not to take what your customer has and replicate it in a different cloud environment. The best way is to ask what bots and automated tools you have and ask this first question: what is the ideal customer journey for this specific problem? And it kind of ties into the idea of omni-channel as well, which is, it is a good idea to have loads of different ways for your customers to contact you. It is good to have all of these tools that enable customer contact, but you also have to look at data. You have to look at this evaluation of the system's performance and ask yourself which channel actually solves the problem quicker and get the customers there as quickly as possible. So this is this idea that we're not just building a new cloud contact center. We're using new tools to ask people what is the best way that your contact center can be designed. And the sad reality, well, not sad reality, but the reality, of course, for service providers is that may not be the same number of seat licenses. That may not be the same revenue split and revenue spend. They may have people who are on cheaper licenses paying less. They're not as involved with the contact center all the time. You may be charging less for some automation in there. You're going to have a bit of a different split and a bit of a different shift. But the end result will be a customer that is a lot happier with a much better CX system. From siloed data to orchestrated intelligence, I think this is just really, we need to ask this question: where is my data being stored? And what part of that data is the most valuable for solving the CX needs of the customer? And I talked about this a bit in the panel earlier, but when you're rolling out a big sort of AI system and AI transformation, I personally think that one of the worst questions you can ask, and I've had this fed back to me to a lot of people, is how do we get all of your data into the new system? Really, I think the process ties into CX design as well, is to ask which data is the most valuable for the use case that we're trying to deploy and bring the minimum amount with you and then integrate with just the right systems to make that system work. And again, it ties into the idea of we're not just migrating what was before, we're trying to work with our customers to figure out, is their RFP too heavy? Is it too overloaded? Does it have too many lines in that gives too much prescription about working in a certain old legacy form? Should we be working with them to educate them on what AI can do to make it less painful? And then using that and using these integrations to build an orchestrated intelligence layer that brings the data that you need into the system when you need it. And this, I think, is a really interesting concept. So I think in the last 5 years, we've been very much fighting to automate. So let's build chatbots, let's build automated systems, let's build self-service. Now, if we move this on another 5 years, we're talking about a much more interesting dynamic where, take the latest announcements from ChatGPT. You can now download apps through ChatGPT. You can now buy stuff on Etsy via ChatGPT. These are all customer service interactions that previously belonged in the App Store, belonged in Etsy's web store, that now sit on an AI platform that Etsy doesn't control, Apple doesn't control. So this question of who will own the customer journey in the future becomes really relevant and kind of a battleground point. There's voice AI startups coming in as well who are trying to take some of this away in the SMB level. And we are at a point where who owns the customer journey is up for grabs. Now, I personally feel like service providers in this room have a right to win. They have the go-to-market. You have the expertise to avoid a lot of pitfalls and miss things that different verticals are going to need in their automation journey. But there is still going to be a lot of competition coming from a lot of different spaces. And a lot of it is going to be coming in between your customers and their customers in the way that ChatGPT is trying to do with Etsy and with the App Store and things like that. But if we move into an idea where self-service is the default, so where a lot of people are doing most of what they need via chatbots and all these kind of things, then we have to move and ask the next question, which is, how valuable is a moment of human contact between me and my customer in a world where self-service is the norm? So if they're not reaching a human agent, if they're happy dealing with the self-service, and if someone else, like a ChatGPT, is trying to get between me and my customer and serve their need before they even reach me, then actually the moment when I get them on the phone is probably the most valuable piece of brand differentiation that I can have in the future. So you need to think about that actually maybe if we follow this to its natural conclusion and maybe by 2030, companies will be thinking, how do I differentiate and create more moments of human contact? Because self-service has become so pervasive that the only way that I can differentiate myself from my competition is actually getting people on the phone and then getting my agents to engage with them in a really informed, proactive manner to solve their problems. So that's just something to think about. And if you're wondering, should we be worried about voice AI startups? Well, 1.9 billion has gone into the voice AI startup ecosystem, and that's only the 190 companies that I've looked at. There's a lot more. So, there is investment money flowing into competition, and I think it is just worth being aware that you are going to be challenged. But I think there is a scope to win. The next thing I want to talk about just for a minute is the changing nature of pricing. And obviously seat licensing, traditional pricing for CCaaS, everyone's very comfortable with that. You're comfortable with it. The customers are comfortable with it. They don't necessarily like how much it costs all the time, but they know how much it costs and they can plan for it in scope. Then you've got people like AWS are turning on full consumption and saying, look, we'll give you whatever services you want, just pay by interaction, pay by minute. You've got people like Genesys who are selling seat licenses and then tokenizing over the top, and then other companies who are just selling with the idea of fair use. Here's an AI license, and we're going to assume you're not going to use every single instance of every single bit of data we give you, and you're going to use a reasonable amount. Where the industry ends up, though, is quite interesting, right? Because we could keep this split where you're paying for seat licenses on the CCaaS front and you're paying AI as consumption. And we could end up in a position where customers are quite comfortable with that because you can very well guesstimate how much they're going to spend on consumption every month. And then you can just say, look, you're going to spend this much on seat licenses a month, this much on your AI, and everyone's happy. But I don't think it's clear which is going to win. I think we may start to see more of a shift towards consumption-based pricing in the very near future as people get more into the idea that they don't want to pay for services they're not using. So I think that we are in the process of a bit of a shake-up. And I think the one thing that we need to avoid is just customer confusion. Because when I go and talk to service providers about their customers, when I go and talk to enterprises, what comes back is we need to know how much we're paying for the services. And if you go and talk to Amazon about their consumption model, they said one of the best things that they have is a sales team that's really, really good at estimating how much the person is going to pay every month on consumption and how much they're going to pay for their peaks and their troughs. And if you can't do that as well and you're selling consumption features, then you've got a bit of a problem from a strategic perspective, because you need to be providing that clarity to your customers to get them on board with how much they're going to pay for AI. And we talked earlier about AI projects failing. Well, one of the biggest things that kills these projects is I've done a POC with 4 people. Now I'm trying to scale it to 100. How much is that going to cost? If you can't provide clarity to your customers on how much the service is going to cost, and then the ROI that comes out on the back of that, then you're going to have a very hard time keeping those customers happy. And I think it's just worth noting. So I'm going to wrap up just with some considerations. So we're seeing a lot of vendor consolidation, both in terms of point solutions being acquired by large vendors. We haven't even seen a lot of CCaaS vendors being acquired recently, though a few of the smaller ones have decided they're not going to continue to compete and spend on AI in the same way that they were before. And they've kind of slowed down their roadmap, or they're buying in services from other people. But it's just worth noting that the vendors you're buying from now will have consolidation. The point solution you bought might get acquired by someone you're not working with. Have that in mind and be prepared for that. Figure out if there's anything that would convince you to change vendor that you're using. If a key point solution for your industry gets acquired by a large vendor that you're not working with, are you ready for that to happen? I think that's a big question to have. I think you need to be, you've heard it from Cavell all day, the investing in data transformation and vertical skills, making sure you understand what the ideal automated journey for your main customer segments look like, because it will be different. I've had good conversations with people saying, in the hospitality industry, if someone is messaging you from hotel Wi-Fi within their room and you're having to ask them what room they're in, you've already delivered a worse experience than a hotel PBX has done for the last 20 years, right? That kind of vertical specific nuance as we move into automation is vital. I think it's worth looking at the industries you serve and trying to figure out whether your customers want more human interactions or less. If it's a premium industry with a lot of regulation, those kind of things, maybe you should be trying to push them to keep more humans involved. If they want to deliver a white glove luxury service, maybe you should be pushing them to keep more humans involved. If you're dealing with retail or high volume transactions industries, you should be prepared for them to demand more automation from you moving forward, because those interactions just aren't worth as much, to be frank. And then plan for new data demands and data-driven use cases. So very, very much expect that a point solution you've delivered now, you will be asked to find a way to get the data out of that in the next 5 years. You will be asked to find a way to take that data and package it up for someone else. You know, if you're ready for these demands, you anticipate them, your customers will be a lot happier when they ask you. And I think that's just worth considering. All right, that's been my talk. If I can get my panelists up here now, and then we're going to have a panel on what CX looks like in the next 5 years, and you can hear what they think rather than just what I think, which I think will be a lot more interesting as well.